Hello, I'm Tom Dorban. I'm a Senior Advisor in Flood and Coastal Risk Management for the Environment Agency based in South West England. I'm here to talk to you about a project I've been running, which is creating a suite of tools that will help us look at nature-based solutions in our river catchments and identify priority locations to put them and priority measures to use in certain areas. So if I start off with talking us through why they were needed in the first place, I get asked three questions very commonly by all sorts of different partners and internal staff at a local level. The first one is, where are the priority locations for siting nature-based solutions? Second is, how much benefit do nature-based solutions provide? Often this is to flood risk, but it can also be to all sorts of other outcomes, such as increased biodiversity or to provide carbon offset. And finally, how do I unlock public funding for nature-based solutions? Unfortunately, at the point of the time where I started the project, there was no tool which enabled us to look at these three things in any great detail or indeed a robust way. So I designed a project that fitted in the middle of that Venn diagram. The other benefit of this is that the delivery of these sort of techniques is done by all sorts of organisations locally, wildlife trusts, rivers trusts, our own organisation, other flood risk management authorities, bodies that are purely looking at community level community groups. And they're all being done in very different ways to very different timeframes with a very different focus, but ultimately are looking at the same suite of solutions. So another aim of creating these tools was to hopefully try and bring some order and some alignment to that activity to make us able to better use funding and resources at a local level. The Environment Agency nationally has produced something which is called the Working with Natural Processes Evidence Directory, which is linked on this slide. On the right-hand side of the slide is a diagram of all of the different techniques which the Evidence Directory looks at. It's a big repository of information which is really useful for these sort of techniques. It looks at each of those solutions in turn. It carries out a literature review to understand what scientific knowledge there is about those techniques. It has 65 case studies from around the UK of how effective these things have been and then whether there are any lessons learned from them, should they be repeated again. And it enables us to understand how to develop projects. There was a mapping study which went along with it, which said where these techniques could be done. However, the gap that left us with was, well, how much benefit do they provide? And that's primarily been focused on flood risk today. On the left-hand side, there are a few pictures just to represent some of the other angles which we could be looking at. So the top one is a woody dam across a watercourse, primarily beneficial to flooding. We have the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis and sequestering carbon. And these techniques can have benefits for all of those aspects. The evidence directory does look at the coast. However, my project has started purely by focusing on the upper catchment, as there's less understanding and locally more individual organisations looking at these techniques which would have benefited from these tools first. So the outputs of the project are essentially two things: a series of maps and some calculators. And I'll just briefly talk you through both, and at the SARC event I can go into a bit more detail. So a mapping level, the tools are designed to help us look at the coverage map on the left-hand side across that whole area of southwest England. Where are our priority catchments where nature-based solutions could deliver the most effective return on investment? Within each catchment, you then see the other maps on the screen, helping us identify the plots or the areas of land, the fields, whereby certain techniques can provide the greatest outcome. We have split the tools into three different categories in terms of the options which are represented. So we have runoff reduction, trying to get water into the landscape more readily. And you can see there are certain areas of the catchment which are highlighted there in red, which are the most beneficial. We have flow pathways, which is the management of water once that runoff has built up into a stream or an overland flow route or a small river, and how we can store water in the stream. And you can see there are some slightly different areas which have been highlighted there. The third one is in-channel work, where we're looking at reconnecting the river with its floodplain. and trying to get the floodplain functioning in more flood events. And there's some slightly different locations highlighted there as well. So depending on the technique you're looking at, the tool helps you pinpoint areas of the catchment where you should focus either site visits or further analysis, and potentially enables you to get just enough information to write a business case. Alongside this information is also a potential layer, which looks at how easy or how difficult it would be to deliver these techniques. Now, this focuses on things like agricultural land use, how valuable is the land for food productivity. It looks at things like the presence or absence of heritage features, historic monuments, and so on. And it also looks at things like urbanization, recreation, and so on to help identify where it would be too hard. So the mapping tools give us the ability to say, here are the catchments where it would be beneficial to do nature-based solutions. Here are the locations in those catchments where we should focus and the sort of techniques that are most beneficial in certain areas, and how easy or hard it would be to do in those locations. Moving on, looking at the way we'll share that information, we're currently developing an interactive online tool. This is a working version, so it may not quite look like this when it's finished. But on the left-hand side, you have the ability to select different return periods for a flood, ranging from a 1 in 2 up to a 1 in 100 year event. The sliders, the bars below that on the left-hand side, are then providing an ability to look at the upper and lower boundary of the different techniques. So it says, for example, on the top one, total opportunity. That would enable us to look at the full 100% of opportunity as it's shown there. However, that's not very realistic. So we could say, well, show me the top 25 most beneficial locations and what outcomes would be delivered by that. The map in the middle enables you to click on different catchment polygons and select them, and the data on the right changes. But the color grading on the map is showing you where the most beneficial catchments would be. On the right-hand side, we have some summary data, and this is at the catchment level for that polygon. So the left-hand column looks at the selection that you've made on the screen, and it shows you an opportunity score based on the overall criteria for how effective nature-based solutions would be in this location. The second one looks at the total potential storage volume in that location based on the scenario you've defined on the left-hand side of the screen with the return period and the opportunity boundary scoring. And the third one looks at the natural capital value for the improvements that can be made in that area. The right-hand column gives you an ability to compare that against the average figures or the total figures, depending on the box you're looking at, for the whole of the area that we're looking at across southwest England. We're also developing an interactive natural capital assessment, which should enable you to see how that bar graph in the bottom left changes over time. That will be linked on that map before, so you can see the different outcomes, the different ecosystem services and how they change in value. The top left-hand side, we've got a hydrograph, the blue being the baseline before any changes were made within a certain catchment, and the red showing a much lower and longer and higher base flow after these nature-based solutions have been implemented. You'll be able to get catchment hydrographs for each of the return periods in the tool by clicking on the polygon. The right-hand side is something we're trying to work on at the moment, highlighting in the blue on the catchment plot the most beneficial pieces of land. Now, there are GIS files in the background which enable us to do this, but we're currently exploring how to do that on the interactive map. So that's essentially an overview of the tool very quickly, which leaves us with the question, once we've finished working on the catchments, do we want to expand this to the coast? And hopefully that's something we can explore at the SARC event and maybe have a little discussion around. So we will learn a lot of lessons by looking at resilient catchment tools for nature-based solutions on the terrestrial river systems. We will understand the value they bring to our work. And we can then start examining in more detail, is it useful to look at that and a similar sort of suite of information for the techniques shown on that diagram at the bottom? Perhaps could it link to the way that we gather our coastal monitoring data around environmental considerations and change over time? Will it be useful looking at sustainable ways to deliver flooding in the future, and might it influence policy as a robust evidence base? So there's a few considerations around the case which we need to look at. Hopefully I can talk to you in more detail at the event. Thank you.